It was the kind of September afternoon which reminds one that the English countryside, while undeniably picturesque, has never quite shaken off its tendency to drizzle. The hedges wept lightly, the sheep looked philosophical, and the railway timetable had, in a moment of rare optimism, arranged for Lord Peter Wimsey's train to arrive precisely 43 minutes behind schedule. "Ah," said Lord Peter, alighting at Coldwater Holt with a languid air and a pale grey hat tilted at the sort of angle that suggested careless calculation, just in time to be fashionably late to a death. His manservant Bunter, implacable and immaculate as ever, handed down the suitcases with a professional sigh that expressed neither disapproval nor enthusiasm, only a sort of upper servant's acknowledgement that the world continued to behave poorly, but predictably. The death in question, as it turned out, had been an event of some inconvenience to the local establishment. Sir Jocelyn Bickerton, retired diplomat, amateur patron of the arts, and owner of the somewhat mouldering Grinstead Manor, had been found dead 2 mornings prior, slumped not in his bed or armchair or even his beloved greenhouse, but quite theatrically beneath the great portrait of his grandfather in the drawing-room. The portrait had, for some unfathomable reason, been removed from its frame and now leaned mournfully against a cabinet, like a guest who'd arrived unfashionably early and been shown into the wrong room. It was this peculiarity, the absence of a frame rather than the absence of Sir Jocelyn's vital functions, that had led the bereaved niece, one Miss Daphne Bickerton, to pen a faintly desperate letter to Lord Peter Wimsey, whose reputation for sniffing out improbable murderers was by now almost as notorious as his taste in cravats. "Did she mention why?" Wimsey inquired idly, as their hired motor-car sputtered through lanes hemmed in by brooding hedgerows. "Why call in the bloodhound when the coroner has yapped natural causes?" "She says the frame's gone," Bunter replied without inflection. "Also that the grandfather's portrait looks displeased." Wimsey arched an eyebrow. "Well, portraits often do. I dare say mine would appear similarly vexed were I forced to stare down from a wall at the backs of passing debutantes for 50 years. The approach to Grinstead Manor was suitably dismal, with ivy gripping its stone facade like a jealous lover, and the drive crunching beneath their wheels with the sort of gravel that had undoubtedly been fashionable under the 4th George. As the car came to a halt, the manor loomed, not large, but tall, narrow, and faintly ecclesiastical, with a widow's walk and a spire that served no purpose at all. Miss Bickerton herself greeted them in the front hall, a thin, pale young woman of uncertain age, with a face like a bookmark and eyes that never quite looked at you directly. She wore a greenish blouse and a nervous expression, both of which seemed to be under some strain. "I do hope you can help," she said breathlessly, leading Wimsey into a room that smelled of dust, roses, and old upholstery. Uncle Jocelyn, Sir Jocelyn, wasn't in the best health, of course, but he'd been in relatively fine spirits. And then we found him there. Wimsey examined the drawing-room with the absent gaze of a man who notices everything while pretending to notice nothing. The portrait, a full-length oil of a red-faced Victorian admiral with epaulets and a sabre, indeed stood unframed against the sideboard. Its absence from the prominent wall hook was obvious. There, the empty rectangle on the wallpaper stood out palely, with faint traces of gold leaf speckling the edges where the frame had once pressed. "And no one recalls hearing anything?" Wimsey asked. "There was a storm that night," Miss Bickerton replied. "Rather a nasty one, wind and branches and so on. The house creaks abominably when it rains." "Convenient," murmured Wimsey. "Tell me, who had cause to hate Sir Jocelyn?" Miss Bickerton blanched. "I beg your pardon." "Dear lady," he said, patting her hand absently, "one must always begin with hate. It is the soil in which murder grows. And besides, Sir Jocelyn does not strike me, from his tastes in portraiture alone, as a man entirely without enemies." She hesitated. "Well, there was a quarrel with Mr. Elphinstone, his solicitor, and Mrs. Charteris, his housekeeper, was most upset over being excluded from the will. "Oh ho," said Whimsy. "A disappointed servant, a legal squabble, an heir with trembling fingers. We are in excellent company, Bunter." "Yes, my lord." Whimsy wandered over to the portrait and crouched, nose almost touching the oil paint. "No knife marks," he said. "No damage to the canvas. But someone very much wanted the frame removed." "Why?" "Sentimental theft," Miss Bickerton offered weakly. "Sentiment rarely runs to carpentry," Whimsy mused. "A missing frame and a dead man, not necessarily cause and effect, but intriguing cohabitants nonetheless." He straightened and turned with sudden briskness. "I shall require tea, Miss Bickerton, and a list of everyone in the house that night. Oh, and do you happen to know what time the clock in the drawing-room ceased to chime?" She blinked. I don't think it did stop." "No?" said Whimsy, eyes glittering faintly. "Then I dare say it will keep excellent time until we catch it out in a lie." And with that, he smiled like a cat in an aviary and began to prowl. The tea arrived on a low tray, accompanied by some wan slices of lemon sponge and the overhanging silence of a house still dazed by its own bereavement. Miss Bickerton poured with trembling hands, managing to scald only one of her fingers and apologizing for the temperature of the milk, as if Whimsy had come expressly to appraise her hospitality. Lord Peter, perched in an upright chair that had clearly not been designed with comfort in mind, accepted his cup with gratitude, turning it once in his fingers, like a man inspecting a Fabergé egg for signs of forgery. He sipped politely and turned back to the business at hand. "Let us begin with the drawing-room itself," he said. "Was Sir Jocelyn in the habit of sitting there late into the evening?" Miss Bickerton shook her head. "Not usually. He preferred the library. Said the air in this room made him sneeze. The only reason he would have come in here is—" She hesitated. "Is perhaps to look at the portrait. He had a fondness for his grandfather." Whimsy nodded, eyes flickering toward the wall where the picture had hung. "And yet there it is, sulking on the floor like a spurned lover. Tell me, who had access to the drawing-room after supper?" "There were 5 of us here that evening," she said. "Myself, of course. Mr. Elphinston arrived around 7 for some legal documents. He left shortly after 9. Reverend Broyle had come for tea but stayed on. He's writing something on the Bickerton family chapel. And Mrs. Charteris, the housekeeper. She's always hovering. Oh, and young Dennis, my cousin. He's rather aimless, I'm afraid." "Ah," said Whimsy cheerfully. "One always needs a Dennis. Adds flavor to the domestic soup. So Elphinstone left at 9, you say?" "Yes. I saw him to the door myself." "Good. And who found Sir Jocelyn?" "Mrs. Charteris. At 8:30 the next morning. She'd gone in to draw the curtains." "And the body?" She swallowed. He was sitting upright in the Queen Anne chair. His eyes were closed, but there was something dreadful about the angle of his chin. His hands were limp. And the portrait, well, it had been removed from the wall entirely and placed against the cabinet. But the frame was gone, not broken, gone, no trace of it. Whimsy leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "It requires some force, you know, to extract a canvas from its frame, and a certain degree of intent. Are you suggesting—" she began, but trailed off. He didn't answer. Instead, Whimsy rose and crossed to the space where the portrait had once hung. The hook was still affixed to the wall, slightly bent, as if it had resisted the removal. He ran a finger along the outline left in the wallpaper, paler than the rest of the room, with specks of gold caught in the edge like dust clinging to memory. "No fingerprints were found on the canvas, I suppose?" he asked, without turning. "None that the doctor considered suspicious, and Sir Jocelyn wasn't bruised or marked. They think it was his heart." "His heart," murmured Whimsy. "The last loyal organ in a man otherwise full of grudges and gout." He turned back suddenly. "May I speak to Mrs. Charteris?" Miss Bickerton, evidently relieved to be given a task, rang the bell. Within 3, Minutes, the housekeeper appeared. A lean woman with a face as unyielding as weathered oak and a mouth that had likely never smiled except in warning. "You were the one to discover Sir Jocelyn?" Wimsey asked gently. She nodded. "8:30, sir. Curtains were still drawn. I thought it odd." "You entered the drawing room alone?" "Yes, sir." "And noticed the portrait?" "I did, sir. Noticed it straight away. Looked wrong, standing up like that without its proper finish. Sir Jocelyn would have had a fit." Wimsey allowed himself a small smile. "So you were surprised?" "I was angry, sir. Disrespectful it was. But then I saw Sir Jocelyn, and that was that." "Had the doors or windows been disturbed?" "No, sir. All shut tight. Though the wind was awful strong that night, so I checked the fastenings." "And the fireplace?" "Dead out, sir. Ashes cold. No signs of burning." Wimsey nodded, thoughtful. "One more thing, Mrs. Charteris. Did Sir Jocelyn keep anything hidden behind the portrait? A safe, perhaps?" Her eyes flickered. "Just a trace." "Not to my knowledge, sir." Wimsey tilted his head. "But you suspect something?" She hesitated, then gave a brisk shake of the head. "No, sir. Nothing I'd know of." Bunter, who had slipped in silently some minutes before, cleared his throat with the precise modulation of a man about to speak into evidence. "My lord, I took the liberty of inspecting the study. There's a filing cabinet which appears to have been unlocked recently. Marks on the floor show it was opened and not fully closed again. Nothing obvious missing, but there's an impression in the dust of something rectangular having been removed." "Capital," murmured Wimsey. "That, coupled with a vanishing picture frame, begins to suggest we are playing with more than one set of rules." He turned to Miss Bickerton. "You mentioned Reverend Broyle. Where might I find him?" "In the morning room," she said. "He's usually surrounded by old parish records." They found the vicar in precisely that condition, hunched over a folio that looked as though it hadn't been opened since Cromwell banned Christmas. Reverend Broyle was a mild, moonish man with a pince-nez and a habit of blinking rapidly when confronted with questions, especially those that veered toward the secular. "Ah," he said, adjusting his glasses. "You must be the detective. I confess I was a trifle surprised when Miss Bickerton wrote you. The poor man's passing struck me as perfectly natural." "Indeed," said Wimsey, settling into an armchair as though he had all the time in the world. "And what time did you retire that evening?" "Shortly before 10. I heard the storm starting and decided I'd better be up early to walk off the damp. It affects my joints, you know." "You didn't see Sir Jocelyn after supper?" "No, I believe he remained in the library." "And the drawing room?" "Unoccupied, though I did think I heard something, well, rather like a scraping noise, while I was on the landing." "Scraping?" said Wimsey. "Yes, it struck me as curious. Not loud, just intermittent." Wimsey smiled slightly. "Scraping is a most underappreciated sound, Reverend. It tends to be either mice or murder." The clergyman blanched. "Surely not." "Let's not leap ahead," said Wimsey, rising, "but I thank you for the detail." Outside, Bunter murmured, "Scraping, my lord?" Indeed. Removing a portrait from a frame might produce just such a noise, especially if one wished to avoid tearing the canvas. They descended into the drawing room once more. Wimsey stood at the fireplace, staring into the grate. No ashes disturbed, no draft marks, and yet the frame is gone. Removed, one imagines, by someone who did not leave through the front door. Bunter inclined his head. Through the garden, perhaps. There's a service entrance near the west wing. Possible. I'd like a thorough search made of the grounds, but before that, Bunter, have a look beneath the hearthrug. As the manservant bent and lifted the edge of the thick oriental rug, a faint clatter echoed, a sound barely audible, but distinct. "Something metal," Bunter said. A few seconds' work revealed it. A small brass key, no longer than a thumb, slightly tarnished but otherwise ordinary. Wimsey took it gently. "Now, "What were you hiding, Sir Jocelyn?" he murmured. He turned to the portrait again. No frame, no keyhole. But something tells me he kept his secrets in layers. And then, quite suddenly, he laughed. It was not a joyful sound. It was a laugh that meant something had begun to fit. Wimsey pocketed the brass key with the same care a jeweler might bestow on a rare gem, then turned sharply on Bunter. "Fetch me the study ledger and the correspondence files. It strikes me that Sir Jocelyn's secrets might be less in the walls and more in the pages." The butler, ever efficient, departed silently as Wimsey's eyes roved the drawing-room once more, resting on the bare patch where the portrait had been. One wonders why a man would remove a frame yet leave the canvas exposed, like a wound unbandaged. Miss Bickerton, standing awkwardly by the doorway, ventured, "Perhaps he intended to repair it, my lord. The frame was quite old." "Ah, but that assumes a benevolent motive. Sometimes the simplest explanation is that the frame concealed something more valuable or more dangerous." The butler returned, handing over a heavy folio and a bundle of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon. Wimsey opened the ledger with the delicate reverence of a scholar unveiling a sacred text. The entries were neat, penned in an elegant script, detailing transactions and appointments over the previous months. "Observe," Wimsey murmured, pointing to a date just a fortnight prior to the tragedy. "A large sum withdrawn, noted vaguely as estate expenses." The recipient was a name unfamiliar to Wimsey. One Eleanor Vane. "Mrs. Vane?" Miss Bickerton asked, a flicker of recognition in her eyes. "An old family friend, or so we thought. She left the county years ago, but correspondence was kept up." "Curious," said Wimsey. He unfolded a letter from the bundle, the paper yellowed and brittle. The handwriting was sharp, almost spiky, with a certain nervous energy. The letter read in part, "Dearest Jocelyn, I fear there are matters unsaid between us that cannot remain buried any longer. The portrait holds the key to what I entrusted to you so many years ago. Please do not forget." Wimsey's eyes narrowed. "A key hidden in the frame, perhaps. The key I found." He tapped the brass item on the table. "And matters unsaid, a poetic euphemism for secrets better left in shadow." Miss Bickerton frowned. "But what secrets?" Sir Jocelyn was a man of stature and principle. "A man of principle often hides more than the ordinary man," Wimsey replied, "especially when the ordinary man's secrets might ruin him." Bunter, always practical, suggested, "Might this Mrs. Vane still be within reach? If she has correspondence, she may shed light on this mystery." "An excellent suggestion, Bunter. I shall send a telegram immediately." Wimsey folded the letters carefully and laid them atop the ledger. "Meanwhile, I intend to examine the study more closely. The unlocked filing cabinet is a thread we must tug." They proceeded to the study, where the air held the faintest trace of pipe tobacco and forgotten hopes. Wimsey knelt before the cabinet, fingers tracing the dust and fingerprints. The cabinet door was slightly ajar, and the drawers appeared hastily rifled through. "Remarkable," Wimsey observed, "how desperation reveals itself in the minutest details. A cabinet unlocked, papers disturbed, but nothing apparently stolen. One wonders what the culprit hoped to find, or conceal." He extracted the drawers one by one, revealing a jumble of documents, legal contracts, estate maps, personal letters. Among them, a folded envelope caught his eye, sealed with a crimson wax bearing a monogram, a capital E, entwined with a V. Wimsey broke the seal gingerly and unfolded a small note. "For Jocelyn alone. Should anything happen, the truth must come to light. The frame conceals more than art. Now," he said quietly, "we are no longer dealing with a mere murder, but a legacy of silence and concealment." Miss Bickerton, pale but curious, asked, "Do you believe the frame was removed to find this?" "Indeed, but more than that. If the frame concealed a compartment, the missing piece might hold papers, jewels, or documents of great import." Wimsey stood abruptly. Tell me, Miss Bickerton, are there any craftsmen in the vicinity skilled in such concealments? She nodded hesitantly. There is a Mr. Hargrave, a carpenter known for his delicate work. He was employed to restore parts of the house recently. Good. We shall pay him a visit. Outside, the sky had shifted from dull grey to an ominous bruised purple. The wind picked up again, carrying the scent of salt and impending rain. The house, once a bastion of quiet dignity, seemed to pulse with hidden unease. At the carpenter's modest workshop on the village's edge, Mr. Hargrave was a wiry man with hands roughened by years of sawdust and varnish. He greeted Whimsy with polite curiosity. "Mr. Hargrave, I understand you recently worked at Bickerton Hall." "Aye, sir. Fixed up some panels and the like. Good old place, though a bit on the creaky side." "Did you have occasion to repair or alter any frames?" "Aye. There was an old portrait frame, rather grand but showing its age. I took it apart for restoration. Odd thing, sir. Found some nails not matching the period and some signs it had been opened before. Like someone didn't want it looked at." Whimsy's eyebrows lifted. "Nails not matching? What did you do with the frame parts?" "I kept them separate, as one does. Left it in my shop under lock and key." "May I see?" The carpenter led them to a back room where the broken frame lay in pieces on a workbench. Whimsy examined the moulding, noting small hinges cleverly concealed in a shallow recess behind the canvas. "Ah," he whispered, "a secret compartment indeed. And the key, naturally." Mr. Hargrave nodded. "The frame's a puzzle box. Whoever made it was no ordinary craftsman." Back at Bickerton Hall, Whimsy felt the pieces beginning to align like the gears of a clock. The portrait, the missing frame, the secret key, the veiled correspondence. It was a layered conspiracy of concealment. But why kill for it? And why leave such a messy scene? As the house settled into dusk, with shadows creeping over the wallpaper and the faint ticking of clocks all slightly askew, Whimsy mused aloud, "Sometimes the most obvious secret is the one hidden in plain sight." Bunter, folding the letters, asked quietly, "And the scraping noise, my lord?" "Ah, yes. That little symphony of sound on the night of the death. I fancy it was the quiet tearing of silence itself. Someone removing not just a frame, but a mask." Miss Bickerton looked from Whimsy to the empty space on the wall and then back again. "And the culprit?" Whimsy smiled thinly. "Patience, Miss Bickerton. A great deal remains to be unearthed, but I suspect the culprit is someone who knows the house, and Sir Jocelyn, far better than they admit." The wind pressed harder against the window panes, rattling the glass as if eager to speak its own version of the tale. Whimsy stood still, listening to the house's murmurs. "In the end," he said softly, "it will be not the noise of a storm outside, but the quiet cracking of a fragile facade that reveals the truth." Whimsy remained in the drawing-room long after Miss Bickerton and Bunter had retired to their respective quarters, the flickering shadows cast by the dying fire lending a spectral quality to the already somber space. The house had grown unnervingly silent, as if holding its breath in anticipation. He lit a cigarette with his usual flourish, drawing the smoke in contemplatively before exhaling a thin stream toward the ceiling. The game was afoot, but the rules remained maddeningly opaque. His mind returned to the curious letter from Eleanor Vane, an echo from the past that seemed to reverberate through the tangled web of recent events. A legacy of silence and concealment, as he had put it. Yet why invoke such cryptic language unless the secret was both vital and perilous? Bunter's soft knock interrupted the reverie, his butler's discreet manner belying the urgency of the news he bore. "My lord, I have just returned from the telegraph office. Miss Vane's reply was received this afternoon. She is presently in town and has agreed to meet with you at the railway station tomorrow morning." "Excellent," Whimsy replied, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "It appears our mystery has drawn another player onto the stage." The question is whether she comes bearing light or shadows. The hours before dawn passed in a restless blur. Whimsy's thoughts were a kaleidoscope of motives and opportunities, each fragment reflecting some part of the larger, inscrutable whole. His mind traced the timelines meticulously, the moment Sir Jocelyn had last been seen alive, the strange scraping noise outside the window, the odd behavior of the servants, and, of course, the frame's secret compartment. With Dawn's pale fingers stretching across the countryside, Whimsy dressed and prepared for the journey to town. The journey itself was short, but the rhythmic clatter of the train wheels lent a meditative cadence to his thoughts. The station was a modest affair, with a scattering of early risers and a few market traders setting up their stalls. Eleanor Vane stood near the entrance, her figure slight and poised, the lines of worry etched faintly around her eyes. Whimsy approached with measured steps, tipping his hat. "Miss Vane, I presume. Lord Peter Whimsy." She inclined her head, her voice steady, yet carrying an undercurrent of tension. "Yes, Lord Peter. I confess your telegram was a surprise. It has been many years since I last saw Bickerton Hall." "Indeed. And I gather quite a few secrets have been left to ferment in your absence. Pray, enlighten me." She glanced over her shoulder as if to ensure they were not overheard, then lowered her voice. Sir Jocelyn was burdened with something more than the usual cares of an estate. Something dangerous. The portrait frame concealed letters that could undo reputations and rewrite family histories. Whimsy nodded slowly. "Letters, you say? And did you know the contents, or merely the existence?" "A little of both," she replied. "Years ago, I entrusted him with correspondence proving a scandal, a liaison that could ruin not only his family, but several others connected to them. I begged him to keep it secret until the time was right." "Quite the Pandora's box," Whimsy murmured. "And the key? Both literal and figurative?" "Yes, the key," she said, touching a pendant at her throat. "The frame was made specially to hide the letters. Only Sir Jocelyn and I knew of it. And now that key is in my possession," she sighed, "I fear it has set in motion events beyond control. There are those who would kill to keep such truth buried." Whimsy regarded her thoughtfully. "Miss Vane, your arrival complicates matters. We must consider that the murderer may have been acting not merely out of impulse, but to prevent exposure. Who else knew of these letters?" "Only a handful," she said, her eyes flickering. "Sir Jocelyn's solicitor, a distant cousin with a tenuous claim to the estate, and, well, the household staff, though none I trust to grasp the import." Whimsy's mind turned to the servants, their rehearsed denials and nervous glances. "I shall need to speak with the solicitor and this cousin. It would seem the web tightens." Eleanor hesitated before adding, "There is one more thing. Sir Jocelyn's nephew, Edwin. He was furious about the letters and what they might mean for his inheritance." "Ah, a promising motive," Whimsy said dryly. "Family drama and financial ruin. A potent cocktail indeed." Back at Bickerton Hall, the atmosphere was charged with a new tension. Whimsy arranged to interview the solicitor, Mr. Harding, a prim, precise man whose demeanor suggested he preferred ink and parchment to the messiness of human affairs. "Mr. Harding," Whimsy began, "I understand you are privy to these letters and their implications." The solicitor nodded stiffly. "Yes, my lord. Sir Jocelyn entrusted me with ensuring their safekeeping. He feared their revelation would cause irreparable damage. And yet here we are. Indeed, the estate is now in disarray, and the police seem eager to close the case. I believe there is more beneath the surface." Whimsy pressed gently. Was there anyone who might have wanted these letters suppressed at all costs? "Edwin, the nephew, certainly. He was increasingly desperate as Sir Jocelyn's health declined and the reading of the will approached. And this nephew, what is your impression of him? Hot-headed, reckless, and perhaps more dangerous than he lets on." Whimsy exchanged a glance with Bunter, who had been silently observing. "We shall want to speak with Mr. Edwin forthwith." The nephew was found sulking in the servants' quarters, a scowl etched deeply upon his youthful face. His resentment was palpable as Whimsy began his inquiry. "Mr. Edwin, you have much to gain from your uncle's demise, do you not?" Edwin bristled. "Don't be absurd, Lord Peter. I loved my uncle, no matter what secrets he kept. Love and motive are often strange bedfellows. You knew of the letters?" His face hardened. "I heard whispers, but I don't know what use they are to anyone now." Whimsy allowed a smile to play upon his lips. "Sometimes, young men, ignorance is a cloak for guilt. Tell me, where were you the night your uncle died?" Edwin's eyes flickered, and after a pause he said, "Out, walking, alone." "And can anyone confirm that?" "No." Whimsy's gaze sharpened. "A convenient alibi." Edwin's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, a sharp knock interrupted the moment. Bunter entered with a letter recently discovered among Sir Jocelyn's papers, one that had apparently escaped previous scrutiny. Whimsy unfolded it carefully. It was unsigned but contained a veiled threat, warning Sir Jocelyn to cease prying or suffer consequences. The plot thickened, and the threads that had seemed so disparate began to pull taut. Whimsy knew that the night's silence was deceiving, that the truth was not in what was said, but in the silences between words, the subtle tremors beneath polished surfaces. He mused quietly to himself. The portrait was missing its frame, but the frame held the key, not just to a secret compartment, but to a family's fragile peace, shattered irrevocably by secrets unearthed. As the shadows lengthened once more, Whimsy prepared to delve deeper into the tangled motives and fractured loyalties that had led to Sir Jocelyn's death. Somewhere in those whispered threats and fractured alibis lay the answer, a puzzle demanding patience, precision, and a touch of that notorious whimsy irony. For now, the house seemed to hold its breath once more, awaiting the moment when silence would finally give way to revelation. The day wore on under a leaden sky, the weight of unspoken truths pressing down as heavily as the humid air. Whimsy paced the library, the scent of old leather and tobacco curling around him, when Bunter entered quietly, a sheaf of papers in hand. "My lord, I believe you'll want to see these," he said, laying them on the table with a careful precision. "They're invoices and correspondence between Mr. Harding and an unknown party." Whimsy scanned the documents swiftly. The letters were veiled in professional courtesy, but the amounts paid were substantial, and the recipient was identified only as M.R. The letters hinted at discreet negotiations and urgent matters handled under great secrecy. An alias, no doubt, Whimsy murmured. But to what end? He turned over the last page, eyes narrowing on a hastily scrawled note appended in the margin. "The frame will tell all. Meet at dusk." The timing chilled him. The note's presence suggested a message meant for someone close to Sir Jocelyn, a final attempt to unravel the mystery, before silence fell permanently. "Bunter, we must arrange a discreet watch on the estate tonight. Whoever this M.R. is, they intend to act under cover of darkness." Bunter nodded, already pulling a cloak from a peg. "Shall I alert the local constable, my lord?" "No, for now, discretion is paramount. The less official interference, the better." As twilight deepened, the house grew quieter, the servants retreating behind locked doors and whispered conversations. Whimsy stationed himself in the drawing-room, eyes fixed on the window overlooking the garden where the fading light barely traced the outlines of the gnarled trees. Hours passed with the slow, deliberate crawl of a watchman's vigil. Then, a faint sound, footsteps muffled against the soft earth, reached his ears. Whimsy stiffened, heart quickening. From the shadows emerged a figure cloaked in dark fabric, moving with practiced stealth toward the garden wall. Whimsy rose and stepped into the dim corridor, signaling Bunter to follow. They pursued silently, the stranger unaware of their presence until a firm voice stopped him mid-step. "Quite late for a stroll, is it not?" The figure froze, then turned slowly. A man, mid-30s, with eyes sharp and calculating. Recognition dawned on Whimsy instantly. "Mr. Edwin, I presume," he said, "or should I call you by your other name?" Edwin's face paled, then hardened. "I don't know what you mean." "Oh, but I do. You've been conducting your own investigations, haven't you? And possibly meeting with the mysterious M.R. to secure your claim, or perhaps to destroy evidence." Edwin's lips twitched in a bitter smile. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Perhaps," Whimsy replied smoothly, "but I do know that threats were sent, letters hidden, and a frame removed for a reason. Tell me, Mr. Edwin, what were you seeking in the garden tonight?" Edwin hesitated, then glared. "I was looking for the letters. If they exist, I want them gone. They'll ruin everything. Yet destruction begets suspicion," Whimsy said. "Better to find them and confront the truth." The young man's resolve faltered, eyes darting toward the shrubbery. "You don't understand. There are people, dangerous people, who want those letters to stay buried." Before Whimsy could press further, a rustling noise erupted nearby. Both men turned sharply as a second figure stepped into the dim light. An older woman, her face stern yet weary. "Enough," she said. "This is folly." Whimsy's gaze flickered with interest. "And you are?" "Eleanor Vane," she said calmly. "I came because the truth must be known, but this fighting among shadows only delays justice." Edwin spat. "You've caused enough trouble already." Eleanor's eyes hardened. "And you have shown yourself more reckless than any of us imagined." Whimsy stepped between them. "Miss Vane, Mr. Edwin, there is no time for recriminations. The letters and the frame must be examined before the night closes in." Together, the three returned to the house, where Whimsy retrieved the frame pieces from Hargrave's workshop. Under the flicker of the study lamp, he set to work, carefully reconstructing the frame's secret compartment. His fingers, deft and practiced, revealed a small hidden latch that released a velvet pouch. Inside, folded and yellowed with age, lay the letters, the silent witnesses to long-buried scandals and dangerous liaisons. Whimsy spread them out carefully. The handwriting was varied, some frantic, others resigned. The contents spoke of debts owed, promises broken, and betrayals that spanned decades. One letter in particular caught his eye, signed simply with the initials M.R. It threatened exposure unless certain demands were met, mentioning sums of money and ominous consequences. "Mr. Harding," Whimsy murmured. "Or someone else." Eleanor shook her head. "My husband's name was Marcus Ridley. He died years ago, but his influence lingers." Edwin's jaw tightened. "Ridley was my father's business partner. They fell out badly." The room thickened with tension. The mystery had unfolded into a tale of tangled family loyalties, old rivalries, and simmering resentments. Suddenly, a sharp knock at the door startled them. The local constable entered briskly. "Lord Peter, we've found something in the garden, a discarded glove and a set of muddy footprints leading toward the river." Whimsy exchanged a glance with Bunter, who had followed silently. "We are close to the truth," he said quietly. "But the river has a habit of swallowing secrets." As the night deepened, the fragile peace within Bickerton Hall shattered once more. The search for truth had led them to the edge of revelation and peril. Whimsy's voice was steady, but beneath it lay an unyielding resolve. "Tomorrow the answers will come. Tonight we watch and wait." The storm outside finally broke, rain pelting the windows like urgent fingers as the house and its secrets braced for the reckoning to come. The dawn was pale and hesitant, a thin mist curling about the garden paths as if reluctant to unveil what the night had concealed. Lord Peter Wimsey, already awake and meticulously attired, stood by the window in the drawing-room, absently toying with a pair of spectacles. Bunter was quietly arranging the small breakfast tray, the faint clink of china underscoring the otherwise solemn stillness. "Not quite the pastoral serenity one expects at Bickerton Hall," Wimsey murmured, eyes tracing the faint footprints leading away from the river bank, as described by the constable the previous evening. "Indeed, my lord, it seems the river has been less cooperative than usual," Bunter replied, his tone respectful yet tinged with the pragmatic realism that always balanced his master's flights of deduction. Wimsey took a moment, then decided that the early morning was best employed not in idle speculation, but in gathering more voices from the house. The servants might yet hold threads unnoticed by the police or the more conspicuous players. He found Mrs. Pritchard, the housekeeper, in the scullery, her hands submerged in sudsy water as though scrubbing away more than just the morning's dirt. Her face was lined, not solely by years, but by worry sharpened in recent days. "Mrs. Pritchard," Wimsey began with a mild but authoritative tone, "you have served here long enough to understand the peculiarities of this household. Pray, tell me if anything out of the ordinary has struck you these past few days." She glanced up, drying her hands on her apron. "Well, my lord, it's as you say, oddness here and there. But no one says anything straight. Mrs. Vane has been restless, and young Edwin, he's been skulking about in a manner that sets the whole house on edge." "Skulking?" Wimsey's eyebrow rose. "Is he prone to secrecy?" "Aye, my lord. Not the kind of quiet that's innocent. Like a cat who knows it's up to no good." "Anything else unusual?" She hesitated, then lowered her voice. "There's talk of a visitor, late at night. Some say it's a man, others a woman. But no one has seen much. Only whispers and the creak of the back door." Wimsey nodded thoughtfully. "Whispers can be as revealing as a shout, Mrs. Pritchard." He next sought out Cook in the kitchen, a robust woman with cheeks as red as her fiery temper, whose loyalty to the Vanes was equally robust. "Cook," Wimsey said, "has anything been disturbed in the pantry or wine cellar? Unusual comings and goings?" Cook wiped her hands on a towel, looking put out by the question. "Now you mention it, my lord, I caught a glimpse of Edwin last night near the wine cellar. Said he needed something for a headache, but he looked as though he was searching for something else." Wimsey smiled wryly. A headache can be a most convenient excuse. The final interview before his attention turned back to the family was with the gardener, a taciturn man named Gibbons, who was as much a fixture as the ancient yew tree dominating the east lawn. "Gibbons," Wimsey said, "has anyone been moving about the grounds when they ought not?" The gardener's gaze fixed on a distant point beyond the garden wall. "There was a figure, sir, about midnight 2 nights past. Slipped between the hedges like a shadow. I thought it might be Mr. Edwin." "And what did you do?" "I did nothing, sir. A man's entitled to his secrets, but the place has a wrong feel about it." Wimsey thanked him and made his way to the drawing-room where Eleanor Vane awaited, her composure like the brittle porcelain of an antique figurine, delicate but easily shattered. "Miss Vane," Wimsey said, "your husband's letters have altered the complexion of this investigation considerably." She inclined her head, lips tight. "I suppose you will want to know why Marcus wrote them." "Indeed, though I suspect it is not the money alone that motivated such correspondence." Her eyes flickered with something unreadable. "Marcus was a man haunted by ghosts, old debts, broken promises, and betrayals that stretched far beyond mere business." "Sometimes the greatest betrayals are those most intimate," Wimsey observed. "Did Marcus fear someone in particular?" Her hand trembled as she brushed a strand of hair away. "Yes, Edwin Ridley, his son. They were like brothers once, but the partnership soured terribly. And yet Edwin claims ignorance of the letters. His denials ring hollow, I fear." As if summoned by the very mention, Edwin appeared in the doorway, his expression guarded but tinged with weariness. "My lord," he said curtly, "it seems the walls have ears. Only the patient ones, Whimsy replied. We must untangle these threads carefully. Tell me, Edwin, about your dealings with your late father and Marcus Ridley. Edwin sighed. It was a bitter end. My father accused Marcus of embezzlement. Marcus denied it vehemently, but the trust was broken. After Marcus's death, I hoped to reconcile, but instead I found only silence and suspicion. And the letters, Whimsy pressed. Edwin's gaze flickered, conflicted. I wished to find them, to clear the family name. But the more I searched, the more I realized some truths are dangerous. Whimsy nodded, seeing the layers of psychological burden behind the man's eyes. Dangerous indeed. But the truth, Mr. Ridley, is often the only path to peace. The morning grew older, and with it the pieces of the puzzle multiplied. Whimsy gathered the timelines, cross-referencing the servants' accounts with the constable's findings. The footsteps by the river did not belong to Edwin, nor the shadow near the garden wall. Instead, they led to an unlikely culprit, a visitor whose movements had been dismissed as trivial. Whimsy's smile was thin, but triumphant. Miss Vane, might I request your presence in the study? There are details yet to be revealed. As Eleanor Vane joined him, Whimsy laid out the evidence, the mismatched timelines, the misremembered sounds, the overlooked habits. The visitor was none other than Hargrave, the estate's eccentric handyman who had used his intimate knowledge of the grounds to move unseen. And what would Mr. Hargrave hope to gain from this? Eleanor asked, genuinely perplexed. Whimsy's eyes twinkled with irony. Perhaps revenge, or the safeguarding of secrets he was paid handsomely to keep. The final link was a letter, unsigned, warning that certain affairs were best left undisturbed, a threat thinly veiled but unmistakable. Hargrave, it seemed, had been playing a deeper game, masking his role behind the persona of a loyal servant. The game was nearly complete, but Whimsy knew the ultimate revelation would come only with a careful confrontation, one that would expose not only the mechanics of the crime, but the frailties of those who committed it. As he prepared for the evening's gathering, he allowed himself a moment of dry reflection. It appears, Bunter, that in this house the portraits are not the only things missing their frames. Bunter smiled faintly, understanding well that in the intricate dance of human folly, nothing was ever quite as it seemed. As evening settled once more over Bickerton Hall, the atmosphere thickened with an uneasy anticipation, as though the very walls themselves held their breath. The day's discoveries had unearthed layers of deceit and bitterness, but Whimsy knew that the most crucial confrontation lay yet ahead. He found Eleanor Vane in the drawing-room, her posture composed, but her eyes betraying the turmoil beneath. Edwin was nearby, restless and distant, while Bunter prepared refreshments with discreet efficiency. The constable had been informed of the planned gathering but remained out of sight for the moment, allowing Whimsy to orchestrate the proceedings with subtle control. "Miss Vane, Mr. Edwin," Whimsy began, his voice calm yet edged with authority, "we have gathered the pieces of a tangled puzzle. It is time to place them together and illuminate the shadows that have so long clouded this house." He motioned toward the letters and the reconstructed frame resting on the table. These documents reveal a history of strained alliances, veiled threats, and unspoken grievances. Yet there remains an element still unaccounted for, an agent working in the shadows. Edwin's expression hardened, but he said nothing. Eleanor's gaze flicked toward the door as if expecting someone. "Mr. Hargrave," Whimsy continued smoothly, "your knowledge of the estate's secrets and your recent movements have drawn our attention." Before anyone could respond, a sudden, sharp knock echoed through the hall. The door opened slowly, revealing the handyman himself, his face pale, lips pressed into a tight line. He stepped inside, hands clenched at his sides, eyes wary yet defiant. "Lord Peter," Hargrave said, voice low and steady, I suppose you've come to make accusations. Not accusations, Whimsy replied. An opportunity for truth. Hargrave's eyes flicked to Eleanor and Edwin, then back to Whimsy. What truth could you possibly want to uncover that would not bring ruin upon all of us? Whimsy met his gaze without flinching. The truth that sets us free from suspicion and fear. That reveals who has manipulated whom and why. Hargrave exhaled slowly. Very well. I will speak, but not without conditions. Speak freely, and I assure you, fairness will guide this inquiry, Whimsy promised. Hargrave settled into a chair, the tension in the room palpable. Marcus Ridley was no saint. His dealings were shadowed by greed and betrayal. I was hired to ensure certain matters stayed confidential. But when I discovered that the letters you found might expose more than just financial improprieties, I grew concerned. What kind of matters? Eleanor asked sharply. Hargrave hesitated, then lowered his voice. There were threats against the family, enough to warrant silence, but the true danger lay in a scheme Marcus uncovered, a plan to seize control of the estate by any means necessary. Edwin's fists clenched. You mean my father's machinations? Precisely, Hargrave said. He sought to undermine Marcus and claim everything. The letters were a warning, a desperate attempt to protect what remained. Whimsy leaned forward, eyes keen. And the threats? Who stood to benefit from this conspiracy? Hargrave's gaze hardened. A figure who has remained in the background, pulling strings and exploiting family discord. Someone close to all of you. The room fell into a heavy silence. Eleanor swallowed hard, Edwin's jaw tightened, and Whimsy's mind raced through the tangled possibilities. Lord Peter, Hargrave continued, I tried to prevent the worst, but the fractures ran deep. That is why I moved in the night, to find and secure the letters before they could cause irreparable harm. And yet your actions only heightened suspicion, Whimsy pointed out gently. Had you confided in us sooner, we might have avoided much of this turmoil. Hargrave nodded, shame flickering briefly across his face. I feared betrayal. The estate's history is littered with it. Whimsy exchanged a glance with Eleanor and Edwin, then stood. The time has come to bring all cards to the table. Tomorrow we will meet again with the constable present. For now, we must rest and prepare. As the group dispersed for the night, Whimsy lingered by the window, watching the moon's pale light cast long shadows across the grounds. The pieces were aligning, but the full picture remained elusive. Bunter joined him silently. You believe we are close, my lord? I do, Whimsy said, but the final truth will require patience and precision, and perhaps a touch of courage from all involved. Outside, the night whispered secrets among the trees, awaiting the dawn that would reveal what had long been hidden in darkness. The morning light filtered through the heavy curtains with a muted pallor, as if the sun itself hesitated to illuminate Bickerton Hall after the night's confessions. Lord Peter Whimsy stood by the mantelpiece, a quiet observer amidst the small circle gathered in the study. The constable was present now, clipboard in hand, and a respectful distance from the others. The atmosphere was taut, charged with anticipation. Whimsy began with his customary blend of urbane detachment and subtle irony. We find ourselves at the juncture where shadows must yield to facts. Mr. Hargrave has offered us a narrative, one which, though partial, provides a thread we must follow. Yet it is the spaces between words that often hold the key. He turned toward Edwin Ridley, whose face was drawn, but resolute. Your father's feud with Marcus Ridley, complicated though it may be, serves as a backdrop, but it doesn't alone unravel this mystery. Tell us plainly, Edwin, what were you doing on the night of the 23rd, around 10 o'clock? Edwin's eyes flickered with hesitation before he spoke. I was in the stables, tending to a sick horse. I know it seems a poor alibi, but Mrs. Pritchard can confirm it. She sent me there when I complained of a headache. And the letters, Whimsy pressed. Were you truly searching to clear the family name or to find leverage? Edwin's gaze dropped. Both, perhaps. I admit I hoped to discover something that might force a reconciliation, or at least the truth. But what I found instead was silence and a warning, unsigned. Eleanor Vane interjected softly. The warning letter was placed under the portrait in the library. It spoke of silence or ruin. Marcus feared for the estate, and for us all. Whimsy nodded thoughtfully. An effective threat, though vague. But what of the missing frame, the one that once held the portrait? That frame vanished 2 nights before Marcus's death, Eleanor said. No one noticed until the portrait was found bare. Curious, Whimsy mused. A frame, much like the frame of a crime, can conceal or reveal. He paused, scanning the room. Hargrave, you claim to have acted to protect secrets, yet your movements near the riverbank at midnight are unexplained. Hargrave's eyes narrowed. I sought the letters. I feared someone else might use them to destroy the family. I had no desire to harm Marcus. Indeed. Yet your presence there raises a critical question. Who else would risk such a venture? The constable cleared his throat. My lord, we discovered footprints near the river. Large boots, not Hargrave's size, and distinct from Edwin's. Whimsy's expression sharpened. Another player, then. One who might have used the fear and suspicion swirling around the estate as a convenient cloak. He turned abruptly to Eleanor. Miss Vane, your recent trips into town, are they connected with this mystery? Her face paled. I did seek legal counsel to understand Marcus's will and protect what remains of the estate. Precisely, Whimsy said, which brings us to another matter. The unusual codicil in Marcus's will, granting unexpected authority to a third party. That was Mr. Farnsworth, the solicitor, Eleanor replied. Marcus confided in him, but I fear the terms are more complex than anyone realized. Complex indeed, Whimsy murmured. It appears someone stood to gain greatly from Marcus's demise and has exploited the tensions between family and servant alike. He paced slowly, then stopped before the portrait, now rehung, but conspicuously lacking its missing frame. This painting, like the estate itself, is held together by fragile supports. Remove one, and the whole structure risks collapse. The room fell silent. The game was now laid bare. Politics, greed, and family fractures tangled into a deadly web. Suddenly, a sharp noise shattered the stillness, a faint creak from the corridor. Whimsy's eyes darted toward the door as it swung open to reveal Bunter, who entered with a folded envelope. My lord, this was found tucked behind a loose panel in the library. Whimsy took the envelope with deliberate care, breaking the seal to reveal a letter penned in a familiar hand. Marcus Ridley's own. The contents were startling. A confession of fear, a hint of blackmail, and a veiled accusation pointing toward one who wielded the power of attorney. Mr. Farnsworth, Whimsy said quietly, you are to join us immediately. Within the hour, the solicitor arrived, his demeanor smooth but eyes wary. He greeted Whimsy with polite formality, unaware of the storm about to break. My lord, what is the meaning of this summons? Whimsy's voice was calm, edged with the precision of a scalpel. Mr. Farnsworth, we have here a letter indicating your involvement in matters far deeper than the mere execution of a will. Farnsworth's composure faltered, a flicker of unease crossing his features. I assure you, my actions have been above reproach. Yet you hold the codicil granting you extraordinary authority which may have been used to manipulate both Marcus and the family, Whimsy replied. The solicitor's eyes darted, searching for an escape. I was entrusted to protect the estate's interests. Indeed, Whimsy said. But the question remains, at what cost and whose interests truly prevailed? Farnsworth swallowed hard. You insinuate something criminal. I insinuate nothing, Whimsy answered with dry irony. I state only that your footprints do not appear in mud, but in deceit. The missing frame, the hidden letters, the threats, all bear your signature, though not in ink. The room held its breath as Farnsworth's mask cracked. His denial gave way to a terse admission, a confession masked in justifications about safeguarding legacies and preserving wealth. Whimsy's tone softened slightly but held firm. Justice, Mr. Farnsworth, is the true legacy one leaves behind. As the constable moved to take Farnsworth into custody, Whimsy allowed himself a rare, faint smile. The portrait was complete once more, its frame restored, not just in wood and gilt, but in truth revealed. The estate's dark secrets were laid bare, not by spectres or superstition, but by the precise application of reason, patience, and that peculiar British knack for unmasking human frailty beneath layers of civility. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, as if acknowledging the closing of one chapter and the uncertain beginning of another. The solicitor's departure was swift and unceremonious, his composure shattered and replaced by a guarded silence that seemed to stretch the very air thin in the room. Whimsy, however, remained standing by the hearth, eyes thoughtful, hands clasped behind his back, as if the conclusion of this chapter had only opened another door. The others lingered uneasily, their minds caught in the wake of revelations that had stripped away many pretenses, but left questions still hanging like stubborn cobwebs. Though Mr. Farnsworth has confessed to manipulating the will and obscuring the truth, Whimsy began, his tone measured and calm, there remains a matter not yet fully resolved, how and why the final act was carried out. The murder itself and the precise mechanism by which our unfortunate Mr. Marcus Ridley met his end. He paced slowly, each step deliberate. The letter he left, his last communication, spoke of blackmail, a threat imminent and dire. Yet no direct assailant was caught in the act. No weapon was found, and the circumstances of the death remain murky. Edwin, who had been silent until now, spoke up. The coroner's report was inconclusive. Natural causes? Poison. There was no clear sign of violence. Indeed, Whimsy acknowledged, which leads us to consider the subtler arts of murder, those that leave no obvious trace but require keen observation to detect. He turned to Eleanor, who looked pale but resolute. Miss Vane, you mentioned your late visits to the town solicitor. Did you share the details of the will and the threats with anyone outside this household? No, she replied firmly. I confided only in a close friend, Miss Hargreaves, a woman of discretion. She has remained steadfast in her silence. Yet, Whimsy mused, even the most discreet lips may falter under pressure. Did Miss Hargreaves seem troubled recently? Have you noticed any unusual correspondence or meetings? Eleanor considered this. She has been distant, yes, and last week she received a letter in a strange hand. She would not show it to me. Curious, Whimsy said, making a note in his mind. A letter that might shed light upon unseen actors in this drama. Turning to the constable, Whimsy asked, have there been any reports of strangers in the vicinity? Unusual visitors or persons loitering near Bickerton Hall? The constable nodded. A few days before the murder, some locals reported a man in a dark coat near the riverbank late at night. No one recognized him, and he left before they could approach. Another shadow in our tale, Whimsy said. A ghost, perhaps, or merely a man with something to hide. He returned his gaze to the assembled group. Now, the physical circumstances of the death demand our scrutiny. The house itself, the scene of the crime, must yield its secrets. Whimsy requested to revisit the library and the riverbank. Bunter accompanied him, silently attentive as always. In the library, Whimsy's keen eyes roamed over every detail, the arrangement of the books, the position of the furniture. The dust settled unevenly on the mantelpiece. His fingers lightly traced the edges of the portrait, now restored to its rightful place, but still missing the original frame. The missing frame, Whimsy said softly. Concealed a hollow space, a secret niche perhaps. Such hiding places are favorite tools of those who seek to shield evidence. He examined the panel behind the portrait more closely, finding a small latch nearly invisible to the untrained eye. A gentle press revealed a shallow cavity. Inside lay a folded piece of parchment, yellowed with age, yet the ink remained clear. A ciphered message. Back in the study, Whimsy carefully deciphered the text, revealing a string of numbers and letters, an alphanumeric code that at first appeared nonsensical. Yet to Whimsy's practiced mind, it was a cipher inviting further exploration, a deliberate obscurity masking a vital clue. "Mr. Hargrave," Whimsy said, "you mentioned the family's history was littered with betrayal. Might this cipher be a key to understanding?" Hargrave's expression darkened. "There have been whispered legends of a hidden ledger, a record of dealings and debts, known only to a select few. It was said to be kept secret to protect reputations, but to be used as a weapon if needed." "Then we must find this ledger," Whimsy concluded. "It will illuminate the motives and expose the real architect behind this tragedy." The investigation shifted to a careful search of the estate, guided by Whimsy's meticulous instructions. Servants were questioned again, servants who once swore ignorance now reluctantly divulged rumors and old gossip, hints of secret meetings, locked rooms, and the occasional late-night visitor. Finally, in a forgotten drawer of an ancient writing desk, hidden beneath false bottoms, they discovered a bundle of papers. Ledgers recording clandestine transactions, threats, and blackmail notes that implicated several household members. The handwriting varied, but one stood out, matched unmistakably to Mr. Farnsworth's known script. Whimsy's sharp gaze scanned the documents, connecting dots with quiet satisfaction. Here lies the motive in black and white. Deception fueled by greed, layered with personal vendettas. But as the constable began to compile the evidence, Whimsy's expression shifted, a flicker of hesitation passing across his features. "There is yet one last thread to unravel," he said softly. "The method of murder itself." Turning back to the riverbank, Whimsy and Bunter examined the muddy banks and undergrowth. The footprints reported earlier, large and unaccounted for, led to a small boathouse, long disused but still intact. Inside, Whimsy discovered traces of a chemical, an odor faint but distinct. A bottle of atropine, a deadly poison, extracted from nightshade plants, lay hidden beneath a loose floorboard. It was an exotic touch, not easily procured, but fitting the subtlety demanded by the case. The weapon, invisible to the casual observer, had been administered carefully, likely in a drink or food, leaving no external mark. Returning to the house, Whimsy gathered the household once more. The poison, the ledger, the cipher, all weave a tapestry that reveals the full picture. He addressed Edwin first. "Your quarrels with your father, though real, were not the cause of death. You sought truth, not blood. Then, Eleanor, your efforts to preserve the estate were sincere, but you were unwittingly used as a pawn. Hargrave's role was that of a reluctant guardian, protecting secrets, but ultimately powerless against deeper treachery." Turning finally to the assembled guests, Whimsy fixed his gaze on the one who had been quiet throughout. The housekeeper, Mrs. Penrose. Her hands trembled slightly, her eyes darted nervously. "Mrs. Penrose," Whimsy said gently, "your knowledge of poisons, your access to the household's meals, and your loyalty to the family placed you in a unique position." She opened her mouth, then closed it, the weight of silence growing oppressive. "It was you who administered the poison," Whimsy continued, "not out of malice, but out of desperation, to protect the family from ruin and disgrace." Tears welled in her eyes. "I loved Mr. Marcus, but I feared what would become of us all if the secrets were revealed. I thought I could end the danger without bloodshed." Whimsy nodded, his voice soft but firm. Your actions, though misguided, stem from loyalty, twisted into tragedy." The constable stepped forward to take Mrs. Penrose into custody, while the others stood in stunned silence, the brittle veneer of their lives irrevocably cracked. As calm returned to Bickerton Hall, Wimsey allowed himself a faint smile. The portrait was complete at last, framed not just in wood, but in truth, an intricate mosaic of human frailty, deceit, and the inexorable pursuit of justice. The autumn afternoon waned into a muted evening, casting long shadows across the polished floors of Bickerton Hall, as the household settled into a tense quietude. The confession of Mrs. Penrose had sent ripples through the occupants, each grappling with the unsettling reality that loyalty could so easily warp into tragedy. Yet Lord Peter Wimsey's mind was already turning, refusing to rest while questions remained unanswered. There was a final piece, elusive and subtle, that must be unearthed before the whole truth could be known. Wimsey stood by the window overlooking the sprawling grounds, the breeze stirring the yellowed leaves like whispered secrets. Bunter approached quietly, carrying a small bundle of papers that had been overlooked in the initial search. A ledger, fragile and worn, hidden deep in the cellar beneath a loose stone. "This was discovered during a more thorough examination, sir," Bunter explained. "Miss Eleanor mentioned the cellar was rarely visited, save for the wine stocks." Wimsey accepted the ledger carefully, his practiced fingers brushing over its surface as he flipped open the faded cover. The pages contained a series of accounts, meticulously recorded yet cryptic in their implications. Names, dates, sums of money, payments made and received, debts settled, favors granted. It was a ledger of obligations, but far from innocent bookkeeping. Several entries referred to a protection fee paid to an unnamed recipient, while others suggested bribes designed to silence scandal and suppress gossip. As he scanned the pages, Wimsey's eyes caught a pattern. Regular payments ceased abruptly 3 weeks before Marcus Ridley's death. The timing was too precise to be coincidental. "What do you make of this, Bunter?" Wimsey asked, voice low but intense. "It appears someone was on the receiving end of these payments, my lord. Someone who wielded considerable influence and was accustomed to maintaining a delicate balance of silence and power." Wimsey nodded, deep in thought. The sudden stop could have disrupted that balance, provoking the desperation we have witnessed. He closed the ledger carefully and turned back toward the study where the rest of the household had gathered once again, anxiety etched into their faces. "Ladies and gentlemen," Wimsey began, "this ledger reveals that our late Mr. Ridley was entangled in a network of debts and secrets far more complex than we first imagined. These payments were made to ensure discretion, to safeguard reputations, and to preserve the facade of propriety." He fixed his gaze on Edwin Ridley. "You said earlier that you were unaware of these dealings." Edwin's shoulders slumped. "I was kept in the dark, as was Eleanor. We trusted Marcus to protect the family's name. And yet," Wimsey said, "that protection came at a cost, one that someone clearly deemed too high to continue paying." He turned toward Eleanor Vane. "Miss Vane, you sought legal advice about the codicil in Marcus's will. The ledger suggests a possible motive for its sudden amendment. Do you believe Marcus intended to alter his legacy in response to these debts?" Eleanor hesitated, eyes moist with unshed tears. "I suspect he realized the danger was greater than he let on. He was trying to shield us from a truth that could destroy everything." Wimsey's gaze sharpened. "And that truth lies not just in the ledger, but in the identity of the individual who was receiving these protection fees, someone who feared exposure enough to resort to murder." At that moment, the door opened quietly, and Hargrave stepped inside. His expression was grave but determined. "My lord, there is something I must confess. Before the solicitor's involvement was revealed, I contacted an old acquaintance in London, someone with connections in the underworld. I hope to uncover more about these payments and the identity of the recipient. Whimsy's eyebrows lifted slightly. And what did you discover? Hargrave reached into his coat pocket and produced a folded piece of paper. A name, Mr. Blackwood. He is a shadowy figure known to deal in secrets, debts, and intimidation. Few have seen him, but many fear his reach. A murmur rippled through the room. Whimsy's mind raced, piecing together the growing web. Mr. Blackwood, Whimsy mused aloud, a man who thrives in darkness, orchestrating fear to keep others in line. If he was the recipient of these payments, it would explain much. The sudden halt in funds, the threats Marcus mentioned, and the ultimate desperation that led to murder. He faced the group with renewed resolve. We must locate this Mr. Blackwood. He is the linchpin in this tragic affair. The constable nodded. I will dispatch officers to London immediately, sir. As the plan was set in motion, Whimsy's thoughts lingered on Mrs. Penrose's confession. Her role, though pivotal, was but a symptom of a deeper corruption, one that reached beyond the walls of Bickerton Hall. The true architect remained hidden, weaving a final, delicate thread of deception. That evening, as the household retired, Whimsy requested Bunter prepare a small packet of the evidence gathered: the ledger, the ciphered letters, and Mrs. Penrose's confession. Send these to Scotland Yard, he instructed, and request their assistance in tracking Mr. Blackwood. Bunter, ever efficient, nodded without hesitation. Later, alone in his study, Whimsy sat before the fire, the flickering flames casting shadows that danced across his thoughtful face. The case was far from closed, but the momentum had shifted decisively. There was a knock at the door, soft and deliberate. Bunter entered, holding a telegram. My lord, this just arrived. Whimsy broke the seal and read quickly, his eyes narrowing. A sighting of Mr. Blackwood in a London tavern, he said quietly. Not far from Fleet Street, he is described as a man in his 50s with a scar along his left cheek and a penchant for solitude. A smile, faint but genuine, tugged at the corner of Whimsy's lips. The chase was on. Prepare a carriage, Bunter, Whimsy said, rising with purposeful energy. Tonight, we hunt the shadows at their source. Outside, the wind had picked up, carrying with it the scent of rain and the promise of revelation. As Bickerton Hall grew smaller behind them, the promise of justice and the unmasking of Mr. Blackwood drew ever closer. The final act of this intricate drama awaited, and Lord Peter Whimsy was determined to see the curtain fall on Truth's stage. The gas lamps of Fleet Street flickered dimly under the weight of a gathering mist, lending the London night a spectral quality that would have delighted any novelist with a taste for the Gothic. Yet Lord Peter Whimsy regarded the scene with his usual combination of mild amusement and professional detachment. The hunt for Mr. Blackwood had brought him here, not to a fog-shrouded crypt or a shadowed cryptic passage, but a rather ordinary tavern with peeling wallpaper and the faint odor of spilled ale. Seated in a corner booth, cloaked in shadows, was the man they sought. The scar along his left cheek caught the glimmer of a candle, confirming the description. Whimsy's entrance was as quiet as a whispered confession, but the detective's presence did not go unnoticed. Blackwood's eyes, sharp and cold, flicked up briefly before returning to the half-empty glass before him. Mr. Blackwood, Whimsy began with the calm precision of a surgeon, I believe we have much to discuss. The man's thin lips curved into something resembling a smile. Lord Peter Whimsy, the pleasure is mutual, I assure you. Whimsy took the seat opposite, his gaze never wavering. You have been receiving protection fees from Marcus Ridley. Blackwood's smile faded, replaced by a flicker of something far less controlled. Irritation. Mr. Ridley was a businessman, nothing more. I provided a service to ensure certain inconveniences were managed discreetly. A service that ceased abruptly 3 weeks ago, coinciding with your threats and the unfortunate demise of Mr. Ridley. Coincidence, Blackwood said smoothly. He stopped paying. I made him understand the consequences. And yet, you did not kill him yourself. The tension in the room shifted. Blackwood's eyes hardened. No, that was left to a more desperate hand. Wimsey inclined his head slightly. Mrs. Penrose. A shadow crossed Blackwood's features. She was a loyal servant, but loyalty can be twisted by fear. When Mr. Ridley faltered, she acted to protect the household. I suspect she believed eliminating him would stop the fallout. But it did not, because the true danger lay in the secret Marcus carried. Wimsey leaned forward. The ledger, the debts, the codicil, these were but symptoms. You, Mr. Blackwood, were the root of the poison. For a moment, Blackwood said nothing. Then, slowly, he reached into his coat and produced a small notebook, sliding it across the table. Everything you need to know is in there, he said. Names, dates, amounts. I controlled the strings, yes, but I did not pull the final knot. Wimsey's eyes scanned the book with interest, finding entries that implicated a network far wider than initially imagined. You orchestrated the fear, but someone else decided to act. Blackwood's gaze was unwavering. Indeed, someone desperate enough to throw the household into chaos. Wimsey smiled faintly. And that, Mr. Blackwood, brings us full circle. Rising from his chair, Wimsey nodded to the constables who had quietly entered the tavern behind him. Mrs. Penrose's confession was sincere, but incomplete. The true architect of murder is someone within Bickerton Hall's walls, exploiting fear and secrecy to cover their own crimes. The constables moved swiftly. In a matter of moments, Edwin Ridley was taken into custody, his pale face betraying the strain of his deception. It was he who had manipulated the ledger entries, altered the codicil, and orchestrated the breakdown of trust, all to conceal embezzlement and secure his inheritance. As Edwin was led away, Wimsey turned to Eleanor Vane. The damage is done, but truth, like the frame of a portrait, holds the image intact. Without it, all is chaos. Eleanor's tearful gratitude was met with a quip from Wimsey. I always say, the proper frame makes all the difference, whether in art or in justice. With the mystery resolved, Wimsey lit a cigar and glanced once more at the London fog swirling beyond the window. Another day, another portrait restored Miss Vane. Shall we hope the next is less frame-challenged? The faintest smile touched her lips as they left the tavern behind. The city's dark mysteries momentarily subdued beneath the detective's steady hand and sharp mind.